You are alive.
Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, February 13th, here in the House Education Committee. Presentation before we break for lunch on the Vermont Arts Council, and specifically a bit about Vermont Arts Council and its work with schools and education and kids. Floor is yours if you introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. Yes.
Proceed.
I'm Susan Evans McClure. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Arts Council. Thank you so much for taking some time. I know you are all dealing in some very thorny, complex issues, and we really appreciate you taking some time to hear from the Arts Council, and for being so welcoming to the student in the room today. I'll say just a brief bit about the Arts Council, talk about our work in arts education. You may have heard yesterday the talented young person who did the devotional, Maddie Messier. She has also submitted some testimony, which I know you have a lot to read, but if you want to, it's a feel-good read. She is an incredible person, and really she documented her story of how learning through the arts has really impacted her. So I recommend that as a great read. So the Vermont Arts Council is the state's arts agency. We're the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Arts. Our mission is to cultivate and advance the arts and creativity throughout Vermont. So what we're really working to do is create a state where artists thrive, where creativity is at the heart of our communities, and where everyone has access to the arts in their education and communities. We work primarily as grant makers and conveners. So our grant making work, we take state, federal, and private money, and we do direct granting out to artists, educators, schools, communities, public art projects, really to just create a vibrant arts community across the state. We also know that our funding will never be enough to meet the needs of every single artist and creative person in our state. So we do a lot of training and convening to make sure that artists have the skills and tools they need to be able to do their best work. Last year, our budget was, we granted out just about $3.2 million to 131 individuals and 235 organizations and businesses in every county of the state. While that is a significant investment, I'll say that over the past 5 years, we've only been able to support about 45% of the applications that we receive. So the need is always much greater. I'll focus on arts education today. It is both my background and something I'm passionate about, and something I'm really excited that the Arts Council has a big role in the state. We know that learning in and through the arts is really vital to living whole, fulfilled lives. And arts education helps us understand ourselves, helps students connect with each other, with who they are as people, and it has lots of transferable skills that help them in other ways too. We do grant making in a few areas to support arts education, kind of at all stages of life. We do early childhood education grants. We have long-running partnerships with Head Start programs to ensure that we're training their educators, and also bringing artists into early childhood classrooms. Our biggest arts education program is our Artists in Schools grants. Those are partnership grants between artists and schools, as the name suggests. And those are multi-day experiences for students, where we bring in an artist into the classroom to work with the teacher. And that part's really important to us because we find that it really changes the dynamic of the classroom in a way that lasts far longer than the artist residency itself. We also do creative aging for older adults programming. That's something we've moved into in the past few years, ensuring that older Vermonters have access to arts learning as well. And we do a significant amount of training for arts educators and teaching artists across the state to make sure that they are skilled and trained in this area. There's a lot of really talented artists who could be educators, and we know that they need to make that connection. So we help do a lot of training on that too. I'll talk a little about the impact of the arts on students in Vermont. The last Vermonter poll in 2024, 87% of respondents strongly agreed that arts and culture are an important part of K through 12 education in Vermont. And there are so many positive benefits for students and communities. My academic background is in arts educational research, so I could cite statistics till the end of time about the impact on students in classrooms, on graduation rates. But most importantly, arts learning experiences really help students understand themselves and communicate about who they are to the world. And all of that educational outcome data in the world, while I love it, can't actually fully explain, the look on a student's face when they come off stage for their performance, or when they see their artwork on display in the halls of their school, or when their teacher reads their poem aloud to the class. And what our work funding arts education does really is expand the world for Vermont students and allow them to grow in new ways. And I did want to read a response that we got from a science and dance integrated residency with artists at Grafton Elementary School. So it culminated in a performance, and the classroom teacher wrote to us and said, it's long, but it's good. I was surprised about the depth and understanding this project supported. not only about our woods ecosystem, but about themselves as a community of learners. One student had adamantly refused to participate. He was terrified to read his poem out loud and to perform the dance in front of an audience. But when the day of the performance came, he told me that if I read his poem, which is quite beautiful, out loud, he would participate in the dance, which he did with all he could muster. I knew how scared he was, but he didn't let his peers down. He was fully present for his parts of the performance. We also have another student who has a range of physical disabilities and developmental delays that make it difficult for him to participate in some of our activities. His mother was moved to tears when she saw him fully participate in the dance pieces. And as a paraeducator supported him to read his poem, he was able to read it out loud in front of the audience. His mother was moved to tears and told us she had no idea he was actually going to read out loud. That's one of, I could tell you hundreds and hundreds of stories of those impacts. And the reason I was excited to come and talk to you today is because what we're hearing from arts educators is that there has been a big change in school-based arts education over the past 10, 20 years in Vermont. From personal experience, when I moved to Vermont 20 years ago, I thought, oh, I'll just become a classroom art teacher. Like, I'm qualified for that. And there were no positions. It was the hardest job to get in America, was to become a classroom art teacher in Vermont. Now there are many openings in all of the arts disciplines across the state. They're having trouble filling those positions. What we're also hearing from teachers is because arts education is not mandated by the state, it's not part of the however requirements work, it's not part of those. Often in school culture, the arts teachers will not be treated kind of as full faculty. And a lot of schools have been making cuts to arts positions in a way that makes it really hard to make a living to do it, right? They'll cut it to like less than full-time position, or they'll put a position, they'll spread a position across 6 schools and you have to drive all over the region to get there. And the other thing we've noticed is that it becomes a significant equity issue in kind of an interesting way, right? So when a school decides to cut their arts programming, if it's a school in a bigger city, there's often arts organizations that will step in to fill those gaps, which is great for the students and sometimes can be problematic to have a nonprofit step in, but it's a great opportunity for the kids. But if you are in a school in a more rural area, when your school cuts their arts programming, there is no one to step in to fill those gaps, and the kids are really not getting that experience. And it does turn out to be where you live determines the kind of arts experiences you have access to. And that doesn't feel fair or right. And it also is not, I think, what we want for Vermont students. So we've also worked in partnership with the Vermont Music Educators Association and the Vermont Art Educators Association, one of the many V acronyms that you live through. And what we really worked with them to do is outline kind of 3 steps that we think are the right way forward. The first is to focus on data gathering right now. And I've had many conversations with Agency of Education folks. You've probably heard this from other sectors as well, but and no one will be surprised, but there is no data right now on what students are receiving across the state. We have partnered with some researchers at UVM with the Arts Council and have been trying to encourage some private funders to support a research project to really assess what is available to students, both in school and out of school, because we know those out of school arts partners are filling the gaps in some places. But we would also just start with what's happening in schools. And I did have a chance to talk with the Secretary Saunders about that, and she was very openly like, yes, that is a challenge. I want to do that too. So we do feel like we have support from their agency, but we don't feel like it's happened to do a statewide assessment on arts education. We also would like the state to commit to minimum standards for K-12 arts education, really guaranteeing what the minimum is that we expect all students to have access to. And kind of most technically, we'd like to update the education quality standards to revise those standards to include enforceable benchmarks for arts education, ensuring that when cuts happen, that they're only allowed when programs are excessive and not foundational. So it feels like in all of the changes that are happening in Vermont's education system, it was an important time, I think, to talk about arts education, because we really want to ensure that people are thinking about arts learning as central to the experiences that all Vermont students deserve. Happy to take questions.
Thank you.
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but I really appreciate you sharing some of those reasons why we're having trouble filling those positions in our school system. Because when you try to get a teacher to spread themselves over 3 schools and they're spending time in their car, it's not time that they could be front facing with students. So appreciate that.
Another piece of it, as the mental health needs of students and mental health care services needs of students has gone up, and those needs are not met by the school because there aren't enough counselors, there aren't enough social workers. There's a sense that arts are touchy-feely, right? It's where we talk about our emotions. So often what we're seeing is that students who actually need professional mental health services are kind of shunted into arts classes, which can be great for them, right? It can be an amazing way for them to express themselves and learn. And also those arts educators in schools are trained to be classroom art teachers. They do not have mental health professional backgrounds. So that has become a huge stressor on teachers as well. So, and many of them are finding that it's just unsustainable for them to be put in the position to be a mental health services provider with no training whatsoever. And that's especially not fair to kids either.
I'm curious, go ahead.
Everyone else might know this. I'm new to all of this. I'm wondering how much of our education of our state's art education success is also reliant on our federal support of arts education. Did that question make sense?
And I would add to it the potential of federal funding losses. How does that affect your organization?
Yeah, so I'll answer them kind of separately. I think the first is actually something we've been working to communicate to schools, is that there are federal funds that can be used for arts learning. And often I should know the name of them, but there is a stream that we're encouraging people to use for arts education funding that is, and I can follow up with some details about it. I will say for our organization and the funding we do, we are funded, the National Endowment for the Arts receives funding from the federal government, and then they spread that out between 56 state and territorial arts agencies. So we're one of the 56. We're the only state arts agency in the country that operates as an independent nonprofit. So we were created in statute to act as the state's arts agency. So sometimes we're a state agency and sometimes we're a nonprofit. We're one of the quasis. And we get about 45% of our funding from the state government or the federal government that requires a dollar for dollar state match. And then we do some private fundraising on top of that too. So yes, as federal changes are happening, we are currently we're trying to figure out what it means for where we are right now with like this year's funding. And we are preparing scenarios for what that would look like in the future. Especially this committee, I am sure. So yeah, we don't know a lot right now of what that will mean, but as there are decreases in federal funding, it's going to mean there's less. I'll say if and try to be eternally optimistic.
Nice.
If there are decreases, that will mean there's less funding going to schools to support all the ways that we support. But then there's also some federal streams that support arts education in schools as well outside of us.
Would you describe that as money we're leaving on the table because we don't have the capacity to access it?
For arts education specifically, what I believe with this federal funding I'm talking about is that it's going to other things in school. So I don't think it's like we're not using it. I think it's instead going to other subjects or other needs. And I'm always conscious with arts education, right? There are so many needs in our education system, right? We don't want to prioritize arts education over something else. We want everything to be funded in a way that is sustainable across the board.
I just had a question. You talked about updating educational quality standards to include enforceable benchmarks for arts education. What do you mean by enforceable benchmarks?
So right now, basically as the EQS standards, we do have arts education EQS. Do you say EQS standards? That feels
Just
wrong.
EQS.
EQS, right? I do say it doubly EQS. But they do exist, and if you have the arts education program in your school, you have them as a metric to use, kind of if you want to, as an opt-in. And I think what we're suggesting there is that to make those standards mandatory. So if you have an arts education program, to use those standards as a tool to ensure that we're keeping a basic minimum in schools.
But it is an opt-in, you're saying.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And this is I will say this effort to have, I hate saying minimum standards because it sounds like that's not the world we want to live in, right? Is minimum standards, but this focus on having some state standards for arts education is a model that other states have been going down this path over the past couple of years to ensure that, basically to ensure that we value as a state arts education in the same way that we value all of the other subjects, because they really are all connected, right? The story I told you about the students doing a dance project, it was actually about learning about an ecosystem outside of their classroom. I think education, as we all know, moves in these cycles, right? So when I was in grad school, project-based learning was the thing. And project-based learning is often arts integrated learning, and we're kind of coming around to that again as we divide it and come back. So
Any other questions? Thank you for taking the time and making the drive
oh, thank you.
and bringing a guest.
Oh, thank you. It was a fun, and I will say, I know he's probably a biased test perspective, but Jack does say that art is his favorite class.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I had it same.
And I believe what he told me was because he gets to do stuff, and I think we should all embrace the
Yeah.
power of doing stuff.
Amen.
Like,
That's important. And look, he's
he's doing it
Doing
right
it
now.
right
It's
now.
happening right now.
art is
Right, well-
happening in this room.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate all the
I
work.
just remember
you're
there's
doing.
plenty of openings for our teachers, school system these days.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't want to go that far. I hope the Arts Council is around for longer than that. We'll see. Thank you.